We're going to recap last week. 1 Kings chapter 17, we're talking about the prophet Elijah. Verse 1. Now Elijah, who was from Tishbe in Gilead, told King Ahab. Now we remember King Ahab was a good guy, right?
No.
Oh! Hey! He was a bad guy. Let me tell you how bad he was.
So bad.
He was so bad. King Ahab. 1 Kings 16. He did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than any other kings of Israel before him. Bad King Ahab. Married a bad woman too, but we won't talk about her just yet. So, Elijah goes to King Ahab in an unlikely place to tell him something very unlikely. And he says, your land is going to experience a drought until I say so. Until God says so through me. Probably King Ahab wasn't real down with that. Because he's King Ahab. And I don't want you coming up into my house and saying, oh, by the way, your house is going to falter until I say so. No way, this is my own house. Imagine King Ahab's thought process. Then the Lord said to Elijah, go to the east and hide by the Kerith brook at a place where it enters the Jordan River. Drink from the brook and eat what the ravens bring you, for I have commanded them to bring you food. Again, highly unlikely thing, because you got Elijah, who was a fat man, probably liked to eat. God is telling him, I need you to go hide, not out of fear, but out of what?
Obedience.
Talk to me.
Obedience.
Out of obedience. What did God need him to do? He needed him to spend alone time with him, to create that margin in his life. Because Elijah didn't know, but God knew what was coming for Elijah. And he said, you need to go spend time with me because I got something for you later.
For like 3 years.
Yes.
Long time.
This is my wife, Carrie, by the way. She's going to co-teach with me a little bit later. And chime in, she says. Which is a good thing. So Elijah did as the Lord had told him and camped beside the Kerith brook. The ravens brought him bread and meat each morning and evening. Now, ironic that it was ravens that brought him food, because why?
They were dirty.
They were dirty birds. Dirty birds. And he drank from the brook, but after a while the brook dried up because there was no rainfall anywhere in the land. Why is that? Because God said, I'm going to dry it up. At that point in his life, God was telling Elijah, it's a season of change. Things are going to change now. You're here, now I need to send you there. Then the Lord said to Elijah, go and live in the very village of Zarephath near the city of Sidon. There is a widow there who will feed you. I have given her my instructions. Again, kind of an unlikely place. Why? Who was from Zarephath? Jezebel. The mean wife of the mean husband. She was from Zarephath. She didn't like these Christian people influencing and coming into her place because she was funding this worship of Baal. Completely unlikely that God said to Elijah, I need you to go to this place and have this widow provide for a prophet of God. Verse 10. So he went to Zarephath. As he arrived at the gates of the village, he saw a widow gathering sticks, and he asked her, would you please bring me a cup of water? And she was going to get it, and he called to her, bring me a bite of bread too. But she said, I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house. And I only have a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of the jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook this last meal, and then my son and I will die. She's at the end of her rope. And here comes this Christian dude saying, oh, hey, you need to feed me first. But Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go ahead and cook that last meal, but bake me a little loaf of bread first. Afterwards, there will be enough for you and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, there will always be plenty of flour and oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops will grow again. What is he saying? Your obedience will provide you, because I will provide to you. So what does she do? She failed. She was in the middle of a miracle, and she didn't even realize it. She didn't even realize it.
He was also asking for her first.
Yes.
First of what she had.
And why? What was he trying to teach her about the first? The first tenth. The first tenth. Because scriptures say, the first tenth belongs to God anyway. So we can't necessarily give him something that is already his, but he wants us to act in obedience, and then he says, I'm going to bless the other 90. So, should be to no surprise to the widow that if she gave the loaf of bread to Elijah first, that there was always going to be enough for her and her son. When we embrace the place of which God has us, he will use unlikely people to go to unlikely places, to do unlikely things, and he's going to give us unlikely, highly unlikely results. Just think about it. Just think about it. You're the widow, you're cooking your last meal. Do you really buy into the fact that I'm going to pour everything else that I got out to give you bread, and then all of a sudden I'm going to have plenty? Do we really buy into that? In the moment, a little tough. Hold with me there and jump to 1 Kings chapter 18. Chapter 18. This was only part of Elijah's ministry. 1 Kings 18, 1 and 2. Now God says, okay, now you are here. Now I need to send you there. Here's where he takes him. After many months passed, in the third year of the drought, the Lord said to Elijah, go and present yourself to King Ahab. Tell him that I will soon send rain. So Elijah went to appear before Ahab. How many of us would be that obedient to what God has asked us to do? Because he's asked an unlikely person to do an unlikely thing. Go present yourself before someone who doesn't like you very much. But he did. Jump down to verse 17. So, it's you, is it, Israel's troublemaker? Ahab asked when he saw Elijah. I have made no trouble for Israel, Elijah replied. You and your family are the troublemakers. For you have refused to obey the commands of the Lord and have worshipped the images of Baal instead. Now bring all the people of Israel to Mount Carmel, with all 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Azra, who were supported by Jezebel. Now there's a large contingency of the other people that Elijah has summoned. Then Elijah stood in front of them and said, how long are you going to waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people were completely silent. Like us, Elijah got to a place in his life where he drew the line in the sand. And he said, okay, we're going to do this, or we're going to do this. But somewhere down the line, it's going to be proven to you who is the real God. Anybody ever been there in your lifetime? Where you have had that decision to be made right in front of you? And sometimes we just kind of waver. Because we like what's going on over on this side. We don't completely trust what's going on over on this side. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only prophet of the Lord. Who is left but Baal has 450 prophets? Now bring 2 bulls, the prophets of Baal may choose whichever one they wish, and cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood of their altar. But without setting fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood on the altar, but not set fire to it. Then call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the true God. And all the people agreed. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, you go first, for there are many of you. Choose one of the bulls and prepare it, and call on the name of your God, but do not set fire to the wood. So they prepared the bulls, placed it on the altar. Then they called on the name of Baal all morning, shouting, O Baal, answer us! But there was no reply of any kind. Then they danced wildly around the altar they had made. About noontime, Elijah began mocking. Now this is where I really start to like him. Because, Christian people aren't really supposed to have fun, right? We're supposed to be stuck up and stuffy and, all this. But not Elijah. Elijah said, "You'll have to shout louder." He scoffed, "For surely he is a god." Perhaps he is deep in thought, or he is relieving himself, or maybe he's away on a trip, or he is asleep and needs to be wakened. So they shouted louder, and following their normal customs, they cut themselves with knives and swords until the blood gushed out. They raved all afternoon until the time of evening sacrifice, but there was still no reply, no voice, no answer. Then Elijah called to the people, "Come over here." They all crowded around him as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. He took 12 stones, one to represent each of the tribes of Israel, and he used the stones to rebuild the Lord's altar. Then he dug a trench. Oh yeah, Elijah was a ditch digger. Around the altar, enough to hold about 3 gallons. He piled the wood on the altar, cut the bull into pieces, and laid the pieces on the wood. Then he said, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour the water over the offering on the wood and the wood." And they had done this, and he said, "Do the same thing again." And when they were finished, he said, "Now do it a 3rd time." So they did as he said, and the water ran around the altar and even overflowed the trench. Now, A, who says the Old Testament is boring? B, does it really make sense that we are trying to prove a point, but yet we dampen what God has asked us to do? And he's encouraging it. This is what follows. At the customary time for the offering the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet walked up to the altar and prayed, "O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all of this at your command. O Lord, answer me so these people will know that you are Lord, our God, and that you have brought them back to yourself." Immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the ditch. And when the people saw it, they fell on their faces and cried out, "The Lord is God, the Lord is God." Now, Elijah was an unlikely person asked to do an unlikely thing in an unlikely place and had a highly unlikely result. And Elijah didn't tuck himself away in a corner and whisper a little prayer so that if it failed, nobody would know. Elijah said, "Gather the people," because he had enough faith in God that God doesn't break promises. And he said, "Okay, this is what you're asking of me. This is what I'm going to do. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I have faith in you that you're not going to let me down. I need you to hold on to that thought." I want to read you a little commentary about Elijah. It says this: "It is interesting to think about the amazing miracles God accomplished through Elijah. But we would do well to focus on the relationship they shared. All that happened in Elijah's life began with the same miracle that is available to us. He responded to the miracle of being able to know God. God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things." Skip down to chapter 19. I want you to keep 2 things in mind as we begin to read chapter 19. Elijah just witnessed a complete miracle. Would you agree that calling upon God to send fire down from the sky, to burn up wet wood, stones, and dust, and to lick the water around in the ditch that he had dug was a miracle? Yeah. We okay with that? On the same page with that? Let's take a little bit before then. There was a dead girl. He had laid his body over and he had prayed to God to restore her life. Not once, not twice, but how many times?
3 times.
3 times. Did she come back to life? Yeah. So Elijah's kind of in a good place right now, right? Because he's seen God at work. Anybody seen God at work before? Yeah? Everybody's hands should be raised. He was there, and God had him here, but now God is going to take him to another place. Verse 19. When Ahab got home, he told Jezebel, the wicked woman, that what Elijah had done, and that he had slaughtered the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. May the gods also kill me if by this time tomorrow I have failed to take your life like those whom you killed. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Here is the downside at this point of Elijah. He liked to work alone. He felt as if he were the only Christian man left. He got depressed, he got tired, he got discouraged, and he fled. He ran away. Forgetting all of the miracles of God that he had just seen, he ran away. Anybody been there before? Where you've been on this high mountain, and you think, you know what, nobody understands me, God's going to forget me, and you flee away? Because Carrie and I have been there. Carrie and I have been there. Commentary says Elijah experienced the depths of fatigue and discouragement just after his two great spiritual victories, the defeat of the prophets and the answered prayer for rain. Often discouragement sets in after great spiritual experiences, especially those requiring physical effort or involving great emotion. To lead him out of depression, God first let Elijah rest and eat. Then God comforted him with the need to return to his mission, to speak God's word into Israel. Elijah's battles were not over. There was still work for him to do. When you feel let down after a great spiritual experience, remember that God's purpose for your life is not yet over. Again, he uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Look at verse 4. Then he went on alone in the desert, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But while he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. He looked around and saw some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Now, here's the picture I want you to get into your mind. I kid about this, but Elijah was an overweight, hairy man. When it talks about the solitary broom tree, anybody know what a broom tree looks like?
Little
Bush. Thank you. Imagine an overweight, hairy man being so distraught in his spirit that he crawls down and he lays under this tree and begs God to take him home. Imagine, anybody been there in your life in that kind of discouragement where you say, you know what, I'm all alone, I can't do this anymore, get me out. Because that's where he was at. The Lord said, oh, I got so much more for you. And this is where Carrie and I were at a point in our life when God spoke to us this verse. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 7. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, for there is a long journey ahead of you. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 7. Tree 197. I remember exactly where I was when he spoke and he said, you and Carrie are not done yet. Anybody been burned by a church before? Have all of a sudden turned this relationship with God into a religion and you have put your trust in people and they have let you down? Yes. And it's okay to say that. It's okay to say, I have been hurt. I don't like what I see. Because we were right there. We were in the middle of what we thought God had for us, but what He had for us was where we are now. Not there, but we needed to go through that to get to here. Tree 197. He uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Hang on to that thought. Put a pencil or something there and flip to Acts. Flip to Acts. Chapter 2.
You just said it. You need no key. Makes sense.
Tell me when you're there. Everybody good? Acts chapter 2. I'm going to open it up this way, though. I'm going to ask you a question. And I'm not answering this for you. If you feel led, say it out loud. If not, talk about it in your brain. How would you describe your lifestyle? Self-centered, family-centered, or others-centered? Think about it. How would you describe your lifestyle right now? Self-centered, family-centered, or others-centered? I'm not going to ask you. I know. Carrie's answer is self-centered. That's a lot. Anybody want to share?
Centered, self-centered.
Self-centered? Anybody on the self-centered crowd? Remember, there's no judgment here. Self-centered? Okay. I'm going to let you off the hooks. I think we all struggle with that to a degree. How about family-centered? How about family-centered? I think we all, and
All about yourself.
I don't want to say struggle, but sometimes I think when we're too family-centered, we kind of get off-center. Amen? Here's the tough one. How many of us are truly others-centered?
I think we all are like this somewhere.
You think? Would you agree with Amy or disagree?
I agree.
Let's cause a fight in
I
the
agree.
church. Who would disagree with Amy? Says that I don't think we're all others-centered.
Can we ride the fence on it?
No.
At least I know whose side you're on, bro.
I like the hokey pokey, you get a little.
For those of you that don't know our stupid little joke, Stephen was at men's encounter. They were having a discussion, and somebody said, "Well, come up." Somebody came up in the middle of the conversation, right? And said, "Hey, let me play devil's advocate." Anybody ever said that? And the guy that Stephen was talking to said, "Hey, at least I know which side you're on." So that's what I did. That was a few. Okay, so anybody agree
Yeah,
about the other center?
I do.
Can we be all three,
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
depending on the situation? Probably.
I think depending on the situation. I think that depending on what your margin life looks like, I think it graduates. I think, at least with Carrie and I think that, at least for me personally, I spent a lot of my life self-centered. Because I was a mama's boy, she doted over me, and that's kind of the way I grew up. So I was kind of a self-centered individual. I became family-centered when I met Carrie. She began to teach me what a real man looks like. And don't laugh, because that's a very serious thing. She began to teach me what a godly man looks like, because my father was never around to teach me that. And then I think as God has grown me, I think now I'm more others-centered than I am really anything else. Agree? Yeah, and for you too, for sure. Okay? So, discussion's not over. Let's read Acts 2, verse 42. We're going to start there. Anybody read this recently?
This morning.
Acts 2, verse 42. They joined with the other believers and devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, sharing in the Lord's Supper and in prayer. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miracles, signs, and wonders. And all the believers met together constantly and shared everything they had. They sold their possessions and shared their proceeds with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity. And all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their group those who were being saved. Here's the first question. Look at verse 42. I'm going to help you cheat. Question is, what were the activities of the early church? Because there's a lot of churches, we talked about this morning, there's a lot of churches who try to adopt the Acts 2, we want to be an Acts 2 church. Anybody heard that before? We want to be an Acts 2 church. We want to be an Acts 2. Sometimes I think they stereotype that because in order to be an Acts 2, a true Acts 2 church, you got to be a verb, not an adjective. Follow where I'm going? You got to be willing to do and not just describe. Okay? So, here's the question. What were the activities of the early church? Look at verse 42. Somebody shout it out.
Breaking bread.
Breaking bread.
Praying.
What? Yep. Breaking bread. Prayer. What else?
Teaching.
Teaching. Fellowship.
Taking care of one another.
Taking care of one another. Second question. Staying in verse 42. How did the new believers approach what they did?
Devoting themselves to each other.
Devotion. They devoted themselves to each other. I need you to hang on to all these answers because we're going to go back to 1 Kings in a second. Look at verse 43. How did people respond to what was going on? They had a deep sense of awe over what they were witnessing. Verses 44 and 45. What lifestyle did the early believers adopt? What lifestyle did the early believers adopt? 44 and 45.
We shared it all day.
Shared everything. Were they self-centered,
Nope.
family-centered, or other-centered? They became a body. They were other-centered until they became a family-centered because the others became their family. Why might the early Christians have had everything in common? Verse 44. Why might the early Christians have had everything in common?
They were devoted to one body, to obedience.
They were devoted to one body. They had one goal, one thing in mind, and that goal was Jesus Christ. So when you have a body of believers that have one goal and one thing in mind, and that thing in mind is Jesus Christ, all of a sudden your beliefs become very common. Verse 46, how often did the believers meet?
Daily.
Daily. Daily. Well, wait a minute. Sundays is good enough for me. I really don't want to hang out every day of the week with these people. But they met every single day together. Where did they meet?
Their homes.
Oh, I don't want to invite people into my house. It's my space. It's my sanctuary. It's my personal place. I don't want to invite people that I don't know there. Anybody been there? Same. Verses 46 and 47. What did the Christians do when they met together in their homes?
Bread.
They broke bread. They worshiped. They praised God. What else did they do?
They told their stories.
They told their stories. And they enjoyed the goodwill of God. They enjoyed each other. What was the spirit of the believers in all they did? 46, 47.
Sincere. Sincere.
Their heart.
Sincere hearts. Last one. Verse 47. What was the growth of the early church like?
Daily.
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 Added to their numbers daily. 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 Because you know why? Because other people saw what real Christianity was supposed to look like. It was people sharing lives. You got a need? I got extra, I'm going to give to you. And it doesn't matter because it's not mine anyway. We're a big family. When you got family that needs something within your family, what do, Tommy? You give. If Tate's hungry, do you feed him? Of course you do. But we're missing this piece that says we're supposed to be a family because we're too hung up on denomination. We're too hung up on Baptists and Methodists and Lutherans and the who knows what. That we forget we're the body of Christ. Hang on to that thought. And let's go back. Let's go back to 1 Kings 19. And let's look at verse 19. So Elijah went and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, plowing a field with a team of oxen. There were 11 teams of oxen ahead of him, and he was plowing with the 12th team. Elijah went over to him and threw his cloak across his shoulders and walked away again. Now, we're going to stop there because I want you to understand the importance of what Elijah had done. And that was big. Because he took off his mantle, which represented who he was, and he put it around the shoulders of Elisha and said, "You are going to be my replacement." Big. Now keep in mind, Elijah and Elisha had no relationship up to this point. Verse 20, Elisha left the oxen standing there, ran after Elijah, and said to him, "First let me go and kiss my father and mother goodbye, and then I will go with you." Elijah replied, "Go on back, but consider what I have done to you." Verse 21, Elisha then returned to his oxen, killed them, and used the wood from the plow to build a fire to roast their flesh. Why did he kill his ox? So he couldn't go back. He wanted no plan B. We want a plan B. We don't want to sell out. We want to sell most. He passed around the meat to the other plowmen, and they all ate. Then he went with Elijah as his assistant. Let me read you some commentary about this young man named Elisha. Few replacements in Scripture were as effective as Elisha, who was Elijah's replacement as God's prophet to Israel. But Elisha had a great example to follow in the prophet Elijah. He remained with him until the last moments of the teacher's life on earth. He was willing to follow and to learn in order to gain power to do the work to which God had called him to. Both Elijah and Elisha concentrated their efforts on the particular needs of the people around them. They embraced their place. The fiery Elijah confronted and exposed idolatry, helping to create an atmosphere where people could freely and publicly worship God. Elisha then moved in to demonstrate God's powerful yet caring nature to all who came to him for help. He spent less time in conflict with evil and more in compassionate care of people. The Bible records 18 encounters between Elisha and needy people. Elisha saw more in life than most people because he recognized that with God there was more to life. He knew that all we are and have